If you have been paying attention in recent months, you will have heard perhaps more and more warnings about big job losses caused by robots and automation. There are those who say they could well boost economies and jobs, so will workers really lose out from the rise of the robots? Welcome to Roundtable. And a very warm welcome from me, David Foster. From factory production lines to service industries, we are seeing the march of the machines, and we're being told that lives will be turned upside down. For worse, some warn, perhaps for better.
The world is widely considered to be on the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution, one where machines will be able to do many of the jobs currently performed by humans. It is a future that promises greater efficiency, but one that could also result in widespread job losses. It raises a troubling question for many. Will machines take over our jobs? Research from McKinsey found that 45% of current jobs can be automated, and the number of robots in use worldwide increased threefold over the past 2 decades to 2.25 million. The majority of jobs that have been displaced or are at risk involve process-driven work in sectors like manufacturing, customer service, and transportation. Some experts say there is a 50% chance that machines will be capable of taking over all human jobs in 120 years. But if robot numbers were boosted to 30% more than currently forecast by 2030, researchers estimate that it could lead to a 5.3% boost in global GDP. So, will workers really lose out from the rise of robots, and how will they change the world of work?
And I'm very pleased to say that joining me at the round table we have Richard Holt, Head of Global Cities Research at Oxford Economics, that's just pulled together a big report on all of this. Ginny Matthews, writer for the Daily Telegraph, and Helge Wurdemann, lecturer in medical devices and robotics at University College London. Helge, you said just before we went on air, you want this programme to help educate people about robots, automation, and all the wonderful things you believe that it can do. So let's hope we get there. But let's start with this. Ginny, let me ask you first of all, why do we call them robots and not simply machines? Because we demonize them to some extent by calling them robots. Everybody gets scared.
We do, because it sounds so dystopian. I mean, literature and fiction for the last 50 years has said nothing but, robot wars, the robots are coming, they're taking your lives, your jobs. I think it's probably because it's being led by techies, and I don't think techies necessarily, present company except, are the most creative people when it comes to finding sort of accessible, engaging ways of describing their technology.
Are they more than just machines? Helge, you specialize in this.
I think they are intelligent machines, if you wish. So when you look at all the disciplines that come together when you want to develop new robotic devices, you have once the mechanical part, the electronics or electrical part, but then you have also the AI or the intelligence of robots. And I think robots are, in a way, intelligent machines.
When we talk about the way the world is changing because of these things, Richard, that was part of the report you helped prepare for Oxford Economics. We talk about, I think it's 20 million jobs worldwide, which is a headline figure, isn't it, being lost because of automation. When you boil it down, it is 1 in 15 million jobs worldwide. We're not really changing the world here, are we?
No, I don't think we are changing the world in the sense that I don't think we're all about to lose our jobs. I think that's just a very strange thing to imagine. But firstly, for those people who do lose their jobs, it's very important to them. It's a bit like saying, well, if one person drowns, then it doesn't matter because 1,000 other people didn't drown. Well, it matters quite a lot to them. And also, I think that robots will be an element in all our lives, and they will affect our lives in ways which, at the moment, we probably do not fully understand. So that's also just as significant, I think.
I should say where I got that figure from, because it's estimated there are 3 billion people in work somewhere in the world, and we're talking about 20 million jobs. That is 1 in 15 million. But it depends where you live, doesn't it, and what sort of country you live in.
Yep. Also, the 20 million refers to manufacturing alone. And of course, what we're seeing is that robotics has shifted within manufacturing, from certain bits to other bits of manufacturing, and now increasingly into the service sector, including medical applications and so on. So the overall will be much harder. But the data that we've got is very much focused on manufacturing because that's the data that's been collected.
And we'll talk about how it could increase inequality, but it could also provide more jobs for those people who perhaps have lost their jobs because of automation. Do you mind if we come to that in just a moment?
Absolutely.
But let me talk about how do you think the world has changed, is changing because of this at the moment?
In this country, and it's estimated, I think, that 1 million people will need to be upskilled, or 1 million people in this country in the next 20 years could lose their jobs to automation and robotics. The two things are not necessarily, I mean, they're sort of kind of mutually exclusive sometimes. But thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in banking and retail and manufacturing already have lost their jobs. It's seen a bit of a sort of slow burn, though. So the headlines talk about, they sort of imply it's a revolution. It's an evolutionary process that's been going on for some time, and it's possibly speeding up, but there's no great proof at this stage that employers, I mean, looking at the UK, where 99% of employers are SMEs, they employ
Small and medium-sized enterprises.
They employ fewer than 250 people. The big news for them is about engaging their employees. It's about gender equality. It's about race diversity. It isn't about buying shiny hardware. So I think it's an evolution that's happened already to many people, but it's going to take another sort of 20, 50, we don't know how many years to actually affect the whole of society.
Don't expect me to ask all the questions because you guys are the experts and I expect you all to chip in. Did you want to say something to Ginny?
So,
and then I've got something for you, Helge.
very good. So I would like to just make a point that it's very important when you look at the world, there are certain countries and certain societies that are more welcoming robots. So I've been in a presentation several years ago from a big robotic manufacturer who was bringing some statistics over how many robots are actually sold in the UK and in Germany. And it was very interesting that in the UK they sell as many robots in a whole year as in Germany in only 1 month. That was several years ago, so I don't know how the figures changed. But it's very interesting that some societies are more welcoming the applications and the implementations and integration of robotic devices.
Okay, can I take the corollary of that? If Germany is a good example and the UK is another one of those, and Germany seems to be more ahead in terms of its automation like this, does that mean it's a more advanced society capable of surviving in the 21st century? In other words, if you don't do it, are you in trouble?
I would say not. No, not necessarily. If you're in the service sector, then you can see that automation is coming, but it's going to chip away at jobs. It's not going to actually replace human beings' jobs. It's going to chip away at the sort of the more prosaic stuff, the knucklehead stuff they call it, that actually we like to dispense with anyway, because we've been talking about people doing more creative, meaningful jobs, for decades, haven't we? But it does come a bit back to training. Who's going to be shared? Who are the people who are going to be shared? Are those people capable of being upskilled for the new age whenever it comes? And are employers and governments prepared to pay the money? We're talking about 90 billion quid to upskill 1 million workers in the UK.
Well, I hate to be unkind about it, but does that mean, Richard, we're going to have to shed a lot of dead wood? People who can't adapt.
Yes, I think deadwood is not a phrase I personally would want to use, but it is true that the progress of robotics within manufacturing is that it's the lower skilled people who have been most vulnerable, and gradually it has moved up the skill level, and that's therefore problematic for them because they're precisely the people who find it hardest to find a new job. Robotics aside, it's harder for them to find a new job. And so one of the consequences of robotics may be an increase in inequality because the way in which it impacts on
Well, you produced this map for your report. It's a map of the United Kingdom, but I guess some of what you put on here could be applicable in other places. And you talk about the north-south divide. In this country, we call that the difference between the wealth that is created in the south of the country, by and large, and the more mundane, hard grafting jobs that you might see in the north. I mean, I'm sorry, that is a huge generalization. Now, it's going to increase inequality, your report states. For what reason?
I think there's a danger that the inequality increases. I don't think it's inevitable, but in the past that's tended to be how it works. that the people with the lower productivity in the manufacturing sectors are more likely to be in some of the parts of the northern England, and therefore are more likely to be affected. Now, if we then don't address that through upskilling those people, then the consequence of that is that the inequality
And you could apply this to, let's say, the difference between Geneva and the southern part of Italy.
Yes, the same is true in Australia, the same is true in the United States. What's painful about this is that the places that seem likely to suffer the most going forward are exactly the places that have suffered in the past, and the places that are more likely to prosper are the ones that have tended to prosper into the past. So it's not that things get evened out, existing inequalities get worse. But the other big dimension to it, I think, is that it's not so much, or it may not be so much a sort of north-south within the UK story, but a story about the wealth being transferred from the UK to Silicon Valley, where the robots are being developed. That kind of really huge global shifts.
So the
might
world
be really
is
important.
changing. And thankfully, when it comes to medicine, Helge, you are part of this frontier, aren't you, that is taking automation, machines, robots, call them whatever you will, to a new level within medicine. Can you give a good example of where you think the sort of work you do, because you develop these robots, could help save lives?
Yeah, so I would like to pick up on a comment.
Because I was going to ask you this question 5 minutes ago.
Okay.
Please do.
So we're looking for new opportunities. What I mean by that is there are certain surgical or medical procedures that they are good as they are, but if we apply robotics to them, they can be even better. And there are some, if you look into industry, that is the same, in a way the same thing, that certain things cannot be done by the human alone, but how can we help the human to perform even better tasks?
Are you talking about in medicine the most complicated, delicate procedures such as tumours within the base of the skull, inside the brain, that human hands would, well, they'd open somebody up and say, like, I'm sorry, we can't do it. Could a machine, either now or in the future, deal with that?
Yes, that's a very nice example. I think many of our audience can relate to this. So we're traditionally, what has happened, if you want to remove a tumor in your abdominal area or in your brain, you had to open the patient. You may have to make a large incision. This means trauma. This means that the patients have to stay in hospital for quite a long time. They have to recover again. And we're moving towards what we call minimally invasive surgery. So either we make very small incisions or maybe no incisions at all. So one example is laparoscopic surgery, where we make small incisions and we put tools inside, and then we perform with our laparoscopic tools some sort of surgery. We try to remove these tumorous tissue.
But that is doctor-directed by and large, isn't it? In other words, they work the machine. But if, let's say it's in the base of the brain,
yes.
And the camera that goes in takes a look at how complicated and how intertwined with all the vital nerve endings it actually is, will a machine be able to do something that a human cannot do and disentangle that?
Some of my colleagues work exactly on that problem. They are looking into micro and nanoscale robotics. They make little particles move. They are actuated by an external magnetic field, for instance, and they move towards so from the entry of from the access point to the area of interest. So they look into different locomotion within the blood vessels, for instance, and then they specifically go to these points of interest where they have to deliver a drug or maybe remove some tissue in a very delicate way. So I'm positive that this can happen in the future, yes.
The first point, I think, is that it's hard to see why the change that you're describing would lead to doctors, us needing fewer surgeons. We'll be doing more operations, we'll be doing operations we can't do at the moment. That seems to be a positive. In addition, it seems to be quite likely that we'll be able to do operations in countries around the world, where at the moment they can't do them at all, because you can install a robot in that country, which is much easier than training up the necessary large surgical teams.
Tell me if it's true. You could not only install it there, but you could operate it from anywhere.
You can operate it from elsewhere, yes. So actually, the whole world could benefit from these kind of developments. And in this example, it may well be the people who are worse off who have the greatest opportunity to benefit.
But is this being developed in tandem with the BMA, for example? Because it looks
I must say that's the British Medical Association.
British Medical Association,
Yes.
sorry. Because when we talk about the knucklehead jobs, factory floor, there's been no consultation. You know, people are just told one week, actually, robots are going to be your cobots and we no longer need you. When it comes to professional, well-paid people who presumably are leading the charge, there would have to be some, I've imagined, some sort of cooperation, collaboration with real doctors. I mean, what does the BMA, for example, in this country think about nanosurgery by robots, I'm wondering, because they might not like the prospect.
So I think the BMA or the NHS, they are very much looking for the patient's outcome. They are also driven by costs, no doubt. So a patient who can be discharged quicker has less, does need less care and follow-up treatment. That's beneficial to the entire society in a way. When we look into new robotic devices, especially for the medical sector, we have to collaborate very closely with clinicians because they are the key contact person who can tell us about their problems. And only if we understand their problems in detail, we can actually develop.
Are any of them saying to you, listen, we're a bit worried this is going to cost us our jobs?
This is a concern that I hear also. When I work on medical devices in my lab, I'm not looking into replacing doctors. I think there has to be the doctor, the clinician in the loop when you apply a surgical robot in the theater, because that is the person who has experience, who has the expertise, who can make decisions on the spot, and we're not there yet.
And the advantages that can be gained by taking away mundane tasks from professionals is unlimited, isn't it? I mean, when we looked at what happened with the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, etc., we're freeing people up, but we're also freeing them up, according to Anne Watson, SEMTA's chief executive. She sort of runs a body that looks after mechanics and engineering.
Yeah.
She says when it comes to looking into the future of leisure, there are no limits to the potential benefits of robotization, which is a great word. Rich?
Well, we've seen that in the past. Things like the introduction of transistor radios made people's leisure lives much better, except maybe if you were the neighbour. Television, all that we know today in terms of social media, all these things seem to, we've chosen to adopt them because we like them. Have we lost stuff along the way? We probably have, but on the whole we've made the choices, and I think that robots of one sort or another may well help may expand our choices, and we'll feel that our lives.
And I love the thing you put out on Twitter about the Oxford Economics report, when you said it's going to inequality, perhaps one possible answer. Look out for the next Oxford Economics report, which will be written by robots.
Which may be written by robots. Yes.
I think you said will be.
My boss is threatening it, yes. But
maybe you know something we don't know.
The threat is that, I think that's the biggest problem. The reason why people I'm just talking about the UK, but in this country there's a great feeling of negativity and the dystopian image is because there hasn't been the C word. We need collaboration. When people are just told your jobs are going and they don't understand why, then obviously they get very negative and they hear about agile working. They're suspicious terms like agile working, digital transformation. It's terrifying for people, for the majority of people, not necessarily surgeons, but people on the street. That's why I think it's very important that all tech change is led from the coalface, not from the boardroom. Because
so
the
we're not all
knows
necessarily
no more than the coalface, necessarily.
Not necessarily all going to be leading lives of leisure. What this is going to do is give us more time for things that we or society consider to be more worthwhile.
But do we get paid for what we do at work? It could be reduced. Our hours could be reduced because the basic prosaic stuff is done by robots. That's fine. So our innate creative problem-solving skills are still valued by employers. But how much are we paid for those reduced hours? All these questions.
Should we pay robots?
Alarm bells. Should we pay robots instead? Not surprisingly, people are suspicious.
And that's a very good point you're making. And also what Rich was saying earlier on, adaptation, I think, of the human is key. Adaptation and education. How do we pick up the people who might have lost their job because of a robotic device, if so, and how can we bring them onto a journey with us? And I think the responsibility lies with certain institutions. So I think the educational sector is very important to teach them, not scare them of robots, what you just mentioned, but teach them in how to intuitively operate these devices. How can we make government give this education to people who lost their job and make them educate them in the sector how to maintain these devices, how to work with these devices, that they are welcoming.
There's a danger of exploitation, though, isn't there? If you can get a machine to do what 5 people previously would do, obviously your costs eventually might be lower, but the person who would desperately love some work is in a weaker negotiating position.
Absolutely, of course, yeah.
Yes.
How do you get around?
I think there's another element which is kind of halfway between the world of work and leisure, which is thinking about older people and helping them with care. So is it the case that we could have robots that could help people in terms of looking after their homes and cooking their meals? One consequence is they'll probably end up with cleaner homes and better meals. But maybe what they really want is somebody to come in, and they want a person, not a machine.
There is a Danish company, I was trying to print it out, but I couldn't get my printer to work. There you go, that's machines for you. There's a Danish company that is talking about this very thing, about having robots in care homes. And I wondered about the lack of human side to this as well.
But then if you think, well, some people are going to be losing their jobs, perhaps we can retrain them to be providing the care work, possibly in conjunction with robots. One of the issues there is that we tend to pay workers such a small amount of money that people don't want to train anyway.
Valued, that's the problem.
And the work is not valued.
Be redefined,
that's right, but we're not collectively worse off, so we can afford to pay people a decent wage to do that if we choose to. But historically, we haven't chosen to. So that's a political issue.
When you talk about the misuse of robotic devices to make people unemployed, I think we have to also learn from history. So very recent, the data protection law that came into place, GDPR. So there's a lot of data that every one of us generates. And obviously, there are some companies who are very much interested in the data. But we have to also protect these, and government and policymakers are here responsible to step in and make certain policies so that this cannot happen.
Sounds to me like you're going off on one of our other programs. Yeah, Helge. So if we could stick to this one in particular, what's exciting you about going to work today, tomorrow, next week in terms of the advances that you think with these sort of machines which you're working on, you can achieve?
My motivation every day is to go into the lab and think and collaborate with clinicians on issues that exists in surgery today. So if I see clinicians struggling with a medical device, with a medical procedure, and that's not leading to the patient outcome that they want to achieve, then I want to step in and I want to look how I can, maybe in a robotic way, maybe in a purely mechanical way, but how can I improve this treatment in order to help bring a successful patient outcome.
Ginny, you've written a number of articles about this. One of the things that struck me was the fact that you said, and it's perhaps not surprising, that younger people are more open to this than people of my generation or whatever.
With the robot in their pocket, haven't they? So they totally accept that the digital assistant is part of their life, and it improves their lives. They wouldn't question whether or not they're getting lazy, they're not using proper grammar. That doesn't matter to them. And they do love the fact that at work they feel they're treated more fairly by robo-bosses, because the HR industry in this country are the ones who have to roll out robotics. They're not tech people, but they're the ones who actually have to sell it to the workforce ultimately. It isn't the technology officer, because most companies don't have them. It isn't the information officer, because that might be a person who comes in twice a week or twice a month. It's the HR on the ground who's selling all these things, and they're introducing robotics and automation in everything from selecting people, sifting through CVs, onboarding new millennial graduates, etc. And those millennial graduates say they're not resistant at all to the idea of talking to a chatbot about a firm they want to apply to, because they think they're much more impartial.
Quick final thought,
There's
Richard?
an analogy there with getting a loan from a bank. People talk about the good old days when if you wanted a loan, you'd go along to your friendly bank manager, and your friendly bank manager would make a decision. And the friendly bank manager very often would make a decision on the basis of the colour of your skin and who your father was and what school you went to. Now it's done by
this, isn't it?
Now it's done by machines.
I've worked
and
it
the
out,
consequence of this is that there is more equality in our lives. and that people who previously were discriminated against are not discriminated against by the
You could say it
machine.
was intuition in the old days, and that was perhaps a great deal better.
What about the
Ginny,
Amazon
Ginny,
example?
this...
I've got to mention
Quick,
the Amazon
quick.
example, though. Amazon had to discontinue the use of algorithms that actually deselected anything that said women, because they looked at historic data which said that people who work in tech are all male. So any CV that had a female orientation was instantly sifted out. So that's not technology actually
But that's
improving-
self-fulfilling, isn't it?
Well, it isn't improving diversity
No.
and fairness, is it, going forward? And this is Amazon. If they can get it wrong,
Listen, it's fascinating. The very best of luck with all of the work you do. I know you're itching to say a great deal more. We can have a chat once the cameras have been turned off. Helge, thank you very much indeed. I hope your next report is not written by a robot.
I hope it very much so.
And Ginny, thank you. I'm going to end with something that you wrote. You said about this, the boss, the HR person. People would prefer to have a manager who doesn't have moods or favourites, free from ego over a warts and all human. That is no way to talk about the man who put this show together. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for taking part. Hope to have your company next time. From me, David Foster. Goodbye.